Welcome to Sleek Notes E-Commerce Boost Podcast, your chance to learn from the e-commerce experts so you can boost your business.
Hey all, so today's topic is super interesting because if you follow today's guest advice, you can generate thousands of dollars in revenue without spending anything else but your time. How? By doing newsjacking. I've spoken with Meerman Scott, who pioneered the term newsjacking, about how e-commerce can utilize breaking news stories and thereby get free publicity. What's not to love? Let's roll the interview. David, welcome so much on your show. I'm really happy to have you here.
Hey, thanks, Julie. It's great to be here.
Cool. If you could just start out by presenting yourself, that would be amazing.
So I'm Meerman Scott, and I am a marketing and sales strategist. I've written 10 books. 3 of them are international bestsellers. I'm best known for the new rules of marketing and PR. I also serve on advisory boards of companies that are disruptive in the marketplace, and I speak at conferences and events all over the world.
Impressive. Cool. So this interview, we're going to talk about what you call newsjacking. Can you maybe just explain what that is for those of our listeners who haven't heard of it before?
Yeah, absolutely. So newsjacking is this awesome concept that I pioneered. And the basic idea is that you inject your ideas into a breaking news story. So in other words, news story is breaking, and reporters and editors are looking for people to quote in that news story. Sometimes people are looking to buy products and services or learn more information about that breaking news story. And if you create instant content, either a blog post or a video or something like that, then you have an opportunity to get your content into the marketplace at the exact time that people are looking for it.
Great. That sounds really interesting. Can you maybe, how's newsjacking different from just doing regular PR?
I think the main thing is that regular PR is done on the company's timetable. So typically, and I was a PR person for many years, doing traditional public relations prior to the real-time web. And so traditional public relations is, okay, we need to create a press release and get it in front of the media. You know, we have a product launch that we want to promote. We have a new executive is joining the company. We have an earnings announcement, things like that. And what's different with newsjacking is that it's not on your time. You're not promoting your products and services based on what you want to do. Rather, you're looking for what's trending in the news right this second. I'm talking about right now. And then how can you create a piece of information right now that gets your ideas into the marketplace when people are interested in it? And that's a really different approach than most PR people have been accustomed to. And it's really something that's been possible only for the last few years, because now we've got the real-time web where journalists can search to find sources. And if you did a blog post and you used the appropriate words and phrases, the journalist might find you. Or if you did a tweet with an appropriate hashtag, a journalist might find you. And those things weren't available to us as PR people even just a few years ago.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So in terms of benefits, how can e-commerce companies benefit from doing this newsjacking?
Oh, it's great for e-commerce because as something is going down in the news, it's quite possible to create the sort of content that will generate attention. I'll give you an example. I'm a fan of a company called Waterfield Design, and they do really beautifully designed bags and sleeves for iPads and things like that. I actually have a nice tote bag from them that I use. I also have a backpack of theirs that I use. They use really high quality materials, nice leather, and so on. So what Waterfield Design does is they create information, content on their new cases for each new model of iPhone, as well as other appropriate devices as they come out. So, for example, when the iPhone 10 is coming out and everyone's really excited about the iPhone 10, and oh my gosh, we're going to wait in line to get the iPhone 10, and I don't know whether I'm going to get it, and this sort of thing, that's the moment that they will create videos and other content about their iPhone 10 case. And as a result of doing that kind of approach, they've been able to get themselves mentioned on national television and in local news and all kinds of different places, because the content that they're creating is exactly what people need at that moment. It's not creating that information when they're ready. It's creating that information when journalists are ready, and also, importantly, when people are interested in buying that product, because, oh my gosh, I just got my new iPhone 10. How cool is that? I need a case for it. Should I get the Apple case, or should I go to another kind of case manufacturer? And that's where their content appears in search results, and people see it in the newspaper articles and the magazine articles and so on. And so that's just one example, but that's the kind of thing that can happen.
So you're keen on trying this out, right? But where to even begin? Here's David's advice on how complete newsjacking rookies can get started on hijacking the news.
I mean, it's one technique among a whole bunch of techniques that e-commerce companies can do, but it's so underutilized that I think it's a great opportunity for people. And so the way that I suggest that you get going with this approach is, number one, you have to get a sense of what kind of content makes sense for you to create. So does it make sense for you to create, for example, a blog post or a video or something on Instagram, or use Twitter with a hashtag? These are all different ways that you can create content. And that's important to, number one, get a sense of how you personally like to create content. What are the things that work for you? I mean, in my case, I'm a writer, so I like to write a blog post. But some people aren't comfortable writing, and they would maybe prefer to create a YouTube video. And still other people will bang out a tweet, use a hashtag, or tag members of the media directly within their tweet. So that's the first thing, because you need to be ready when that news story breaks so that you can create content when that moment is right, and get that out there when people are looking. So then the next step is that you follow what's going on in the news, either the global news or your own country's national news or a local news. And that kind of depends on what kind of product or service you sell. So, for example, with e-commerce, if you're selling globally, then it might make sense to look at global news stories. For example, we just mentioned the iPhone 10 launch. But if you're an organization that's only selling something locally, for example, a car dealer, then you probably want to focus on only your local market. So you might look at the local newspaper, magazine, radio station, and so on for that particular local market. What I do is I follow Google News. So that's news.google.com. I also follow Twitter Moments to find out what's trending on Twitter. And I look at those news stories on a regular basis, 3 or 4 or even 5 times a day, because I'm looking for news stories that I have and that I have the ability to comment on. So I'll give you an example. Another sort of e-commerce example. There's a company called Cash for Purses, and the CEO of that company's name is Trent Silver. And he's a young entrepreneur. He's in his 20s, and he founded this company, Cash for Purses. What they do is they purchase people's used handbags, their used purses. They fix them up if they need to be repaired, and then they sell them on eBay or through boutique shops. And it's all high-end, expensive handbags, like from Louis Vuitton and Prada and so on. And so what Trent Silver told me is that his biggest problem is getting purses to sell. Once he has them, he has buyers, but getting the ones that people want to sell to him is the challenge. And what he does is he looks for news stories that he can comment on. So, for example, when the actress Lindsay Lohan was having money problems, what Trent did was he offered to buy her used handbags. And he did that through a blog post and also sending a tweet and tagging individual journalists. And that was brilliant because now the media has something else to write about. Not only do they write about Lindsay Lohan having money problems, she's not getting any more movie deals and whatnot, but they also now can write about the fact that Trent Silver is offering to purchase her handbags. And a whole bunch of media outlets wrote about this. And it got Trent Silver tons of attention for doing this. So there was, for example, the Huffington Post wrote about it. And lots of different organizations wrote about it. One of the headlines was Lindsay Lohan's financial freedom might come from cashforpurses.com. And everybody who wrote about it was linking to Trent Silver's Cash for Purses business. And what he told me is just from this one newsjacking, just this one single newsjacking, he had 8,000 online inquiries on his e-commerce engine, and he closed 18% of them for $250,000 US worth of business. That all happened within about a week as a result of one newsjacking. Now remember, it's free to newsjack, so for him that was a huge result.
Whoa, that's really amazing. But I'm thinking, how do you know that it's a good story to tap into and a good story to newsjack?
What you need to think about is, number one, and then this is really the most important thing, is it a story that you have a legitimate tie to? So, for example, with the Lindsay Lohan story, the whole idea was that people were talking about the fact that she had money trouble. And Trent Silver's business is a business that buys people's used purses. So that made sense. That was a news story that was linking to what Trent Silver's business is. And where e-commerce companies fail sometimes with newsjacking is they try to apply their news stories, their business to news stories that are not appropriate, that they do not have a natural tie to. I'll give you an example. I live in the east coast of the United States, and here there was a hurricane that came through a couple of years ago, and American Apparel, which is a clothing manufacturer, tried to sell through their e-commerce site, tried to sell clothing based on this hurricane that came through. And it was called Hurricane Sandy. It came up through the American East Coast. And they had a Hurricane Sandy sale. If you lived in these particular American states, you could get 20% off of your purchase. But people said, no, that's ridiculous. Don't try to sell product on the back of people's misery. And in fact, that was a terrible hurricane. I think around 50 people lost their lives, sadly. Many people lost their homes. There were over 1 million people who had lost power. And so it was considered a disaster. It was a tragedy. Yet here was a company trying to use this tragedy as a way to drive new customers to their e-commerce site. So don't do that. That is not appropriate. It's not appropriate. So in general, you should avoid any stories that have a a very negative connotation, especially anything that involves death and destruction, like this Hurricane Sandy story had.
Sure. But I'm thinking, because when Donald Trump got elected, I received a newsletter from Ryanair who said something like, prices as shocking as the election. And I'm thinking, are political topics a no-go as well, or is it just a matter of doing it right?
Well, what was interesting about Ryanair is that Ryanair is based in Europe, and Donald Trump was elected here in the United States. So I think in that case, that's something that can be done. But I would very much avoid doing anything around politics within your own marketplace. So, for example, I don't think it would have been appropriate for an American airline to do the same thing because, there's roughly half of the people who voted for Donald Trump. The other half of people who voted for Hillary Clinton. And then there were, of course, a large number of people who didn't vote at all. So you have the potential of annoying a large number of people if you talk about politics in your own marketplace. However, I think the Ryanair one is okay because it's targeting the European market. Ryanair does not fly to the United States. So I think that probably is okay. What many of the ones that I saw that talked about Donald Trump did was focused on humor. And so, if you're going to combine politics and humor in this way, you have to be very, very careful. And I would say avoid it if you're talking about doing it in your home marketplace.
Once you've got your story, you've got the setup, you've created the content, it's all good. But what's the next step? I didn't know, so I asked David if a classic press release will do the job. Here's what he said.
Well, it's possible to do a press release, but that's more of a traditional kind of approach. Generally, what works better is to get that content out there where members of the media will see it, number one, and number two, potential customers will see it. And press release is a little bit more difficult to get this kind of thing out there. So what I always recommend is, number one, if you do a blog post, make sure that you have the right keywords in that blog post, the right phrases in that blog post. Because as journalists are looking for as journalists are looking for people to quote in their stories, they're using Google and other search engines to look for people that they can quote. And what's neat is that blog posts are indexed in real time by Google. The same thing holds true for a YouTube video. Just make sure that in the description of the YouTube video, you're using appropriate words and phrases that describe the story in such a way that the journalists and potential customers will find it. If you're using Twitter and other social networks, see if there's a hashtag that you can use. Another approach that I think can work really well is if you know that there's a journalist who's covering that particular story. Maybe, for example, if you run an e-commerce business in a particular marketplace and you know that there are a handful of journalists who cover your company or who are covering that breaking news story, what you can do is create a tweet and then perhaps link that tweet to a blog post or some longer form content. But you can actually tag the Twitter IDs of those reporters who you know, or those reporters who are writing stories about the particular thing that you're newsjacking, so that they hopefully will see what you've got out there.
All right, yeah. So you wouldn't recommend just emailing them directly or giving them a call saying, hey, we've done this. It's more like you want them to realize you've done this blog post.
There's nothing necessarily wrong of trying to email them or call them. So I'm not saying don't do that, but that's more of a traditional public relations approach. And in my experience, based on analyzing hundreds and hundreds of people who have had tremendous success using newsjacking, generally it works better if you're using the tools of the real-time web to reach journalists and potential customers than using traditional public relations techniques.
Sure. Okay, so just to sum up, what would your major tips for making newsjacking happen for an e-commerce that's never tried it before?
For somebody who's never tried it before, the first thing I would do is make sure that everyone in your organization who needs to know understands what you're trying to do. Because newsjacking is incredibly powerful, but it has the potential for people to misunderstand it. So, if you're in the marketing department or the public relations department of an e-commerce site, study up on newsjacking. I've got a lot of information on my site, newsjacking.com. I've got some free graphics that you can download and so on newsjacking.com. So study up a little bit on it and be prepared to explain to others in your organization what newsjacking is and how you're going to use it. That's the first suggestion I would make. The second suggestion I would make is begin to monitor news. And I would suggest using Google News as one of your approaches. I personally use Google News both as a Google News app on my iPhone, but I also go to the Google News site, which is news.google.com on my computer, and I visit that 4 or 5 times every single day looking for news stories that I might personally newsjack myself. Then be ready to understand how you're going to get that content out there. Are you going to use a blog? Are you going to use a video channel? Are you going to use Twitter or another social network, or perhaps with a hashtag? And just be prepared so that when the news story does break, that you're ready to push that content out there. And then you have to realize that when the moment is right, it's right now, that you can't wait. And it's likely that a news story will break when it's uncomfortable for you timing-wise. It's not going to happen at 2:00 in the afternoon when you're in the office. It's likely that a great story might be breaking on a weekend or on a holiday, or late at night. Maybe you're out at the pub and you look at your phone and all of a sudden there's a news story breaking, which is perfect for you to comment on. You have to be ready, no matter where you are, to be able to take advantage of that news story. And then finally, I would just suggest get a sense for what are the kinds of news stories that your business is such that you could comment on appropriately, and just be very careful about the possibility of an inappropriate story, and just be careful around death and destruction and stories that are way outside of what your business does.
Perfect. Okay, David, thank you so much for your time. That was really great.
My pleasure, Julie. Thank you.
Alrighty, that's all from E-commerce Boost this time round. As always, I'll be thrilled if you could give us a nice rating in iTunes. It's a small thing for you to do and a massive thing for me. I mean it. It literally would make my day. Thanks a lot, folks. See you next time.
This session of E-commerce Boost was produced by Sleeknote. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on tactics and strategies that'll help boost your e-commerce.